So, I wanted to talk about AI tools here at Daily, and the context is back in mid June, we formed a temporary working group to talk about using various AI tools here. The members of that group were Christian, Felipe, me, Stephanie, and Vanessa. And our goal was to make recommendations about just using these AI tools. There's a bunch of stuff out there like Copilot and ChatGPT, and we wanted to sort of evaluate the safety and utility of these things. So our basic working style was we brainstormed and researched and used the tools in our day-to-day work. And we have some recommendations, but before I get directly into the recommendations, I want to talk a little bit about what we thought about in terms of risks and rewards. So the first one is just the ethics of it. I think there has been, again, going back to Copilot, some discussion about what it means that GitHub trained a model on a bunch of public repositories where the authors weren't necessarily intending their code to be trained in this way and to be used in this way. And this is a fuzzy situation, and there are no right and wrong answers to this, ex- except in like pathological cases. But I think it is a thing to think about and to keep in mind as we use these tools. The second one is a little more concrete. What are the risks for leaking code and secrets? I'm going to keep coming back to Copilot because it's the thing I used most and maybe the most concrete thing. But by default, Copilot uses the code that it's inspecting to make recommendations as perhaps as training data. It's a little bit fuzzy, but it is definitely sent up to GitHub and used to improve their tools. And the second thing is secrets. And when I say secrets, I sort of mean two different things. One is the kind of stuff that is in our .env file, like, and again, if we're using tools that are using the context as training data, there's a sort of nightmare scenario where somebody types in equals and Copilot auto completes it to our right. It's probably not likely, but also we can't really say for sure that using that training data makes it impossible. Um, and then the other kinds of secrets are stuff like maybe we're using ChatGPT to write a product description for something that hasn't launched yet. And the context that we give ChatGPT for that product inadvertently goes into the training data again. So, potential risk. Another risk is inaccurate results, right? Like these tools are probabilistic and not necessarily accurate. And how do we know how much trust to place in their output? And I think that's sort of tied into the context in which we use the tools, but that is a thing to consider. And then the last one is noise for risks. And I will say this is an incomplete list. These are sort of the highlights. When we think about noise, when we talked about noise in the working group, it's stuff like it's very, very easy to generate a lot of stuff with ChatGPT, right? You can make ChatGPT write you a 15-page document. You can probably use Copilot to generate like pretty big functions. It's not always the case that more is better. And sort of removing the check of the need to do work by yourself to generate a lot of words can place a burden on the people who need to read those words. So just being aware of that kind of dynamic, like where is the actual work being done to understand what ChatGPT is saying, for instance. But then there's rewards, obviously, right? These are, I would say, tools that are powerful enough that they verge on magic, right? The first time Copilot successfully auto completed a thing that was super context dependent for me, it blew my mind. And like it really does save time. Christian had some demos where he used ChatGPT to write new React modules and unit tests, I think. But again, it is this real force multiplier. And I think it would be a mistake to not use these tools, even though there are downsides to them. And the other thing, this is a little more abstract, but we talked about the importance of building this kind of tactile familiarity with what this technology does and what its strengths are and what its limitations are to help us as we build our own products that use this technology. So I think for me, using Copilot a lot and sort of understanding how often it's wrong and how often it's right, and when it's wrong and when it's right, also makes me think about if we train our own LLMs based on meeting stuff and also just generally what's available to these tools and what are their failure modes and success modes, I think can help us write better code and design better products and so on. So that's risks and rewards. And then given that, here's some recommendations from the working group. At a high level, use your best judgment. I think one of the great things about Daily is we are all adults and we all treat each other like adults and we trust each other to do the right things and we don't generally have forced processes to do things. And that's a strength. That's good. Given that, here's some sort of guidelines we have are to prefer established and trusted organizations. I think with the state of AI technology, there's a lot of new stuff happening all the time at a very rapid pace. There's lots of startups and there's lots of more established, Microsoft or Google or OpenAI. And I think there's potential for some of the smaller companies or smaller organizations to make riskier security decisions or to just not make security decisions at all. And potential for leaks and stuff with those are higher. Be aware of what data is being transmitted and how it's used. Going back to Copilot, a thing that really surprised me is if you have 5 tabs open in VS Code, Copilot is using all of those tabs for context. It's not just the file you're editing. So if you, for instance, have your .env file open, that is being used as context for Copilot. Um, so for other tools, just be aware of how they're integrating into what you're doing and what data they're receiving. And then know how the tool's output will be used. Will the consumer of the tool's output know it was generated with AI? With Copilot, that's super obvious, right? Like you're in the code, Copilot plops something in there, you know where it came from, and you know what to do with it. For ChatGPT, the user of ChatGPT knows, but if you copy paste directly from ChatGPT, the person reading that may not. How much trust should be placed in it? Like how valid and strong is the output, and how correct does it need to be? I think again, going back to Copilot, it's actually fine if the code is wrong because there's so many layers of checking about whether code is doing like I write incorrect code all the time all by myself with no help, but I also write tests, I also run it and so on, and I know I have expectations about how to test that the code is good. Um, for something where you're asking ChatGPT to summarize something, you might not have as much context. You might need to do more checking and be more aware. And then how correct will it seem? Again, I think ChatGPT has a kind of failure mode where it's extremely confidently wrong. And knowing that about ChatGPT can help you use it better. And finally, we made a handy checklist, which I'll just walk through um, for Copilot. So here's this checklist that we came up with in the working group. And basically, this is if you have some new tool you want to try out that you want to use, this is a way to just sort of get a gut check on the kinds of things to think about before starting that using that tool. And we have some of these already filled out for ChatGPT and Copilot. And the hope is as you discover new tools and start using them, you can fill these out and share them so that other people at the org know, like, oh, somebody's already thought about this and here's what they think. So I'll just go through this quickly for Copilot. What problem or task does it help us accomplish? It improves coding efficiency. It makes it easier to write code. And how does that contribute to business goals and objectives? Faster feature development. Pretty straightforward. What is the privacy policy in terms of service? So this is an interesting one. If we come back here to the privacy statement, this is, a bunch of words about how they use your data, but the important thing to notice here is there's actually a different privacy policy for Copilot for Business. And the important thing about this is this code snippets data part, where it says it's only transmitted in real time and is discarded once the suggestion is returned. And that is not true by default for Copilot for individuals. Um, so this is a thing where just the awareness of how the tool is using your data is important. Um, and how is user data handled and protected? And that's in the privacy statement. Are there default settings that you need to change? And the answer to that one also for Copilot is yes. So by default, Copilot consumes all your files, no matter what type they are. And our strong recommendation from the working group is that you explicitly tell it what kinds of files to do. So for me, I just have it set for JavaScript and Python. Their demo here
Moishe,
includes YAML, plain
Moishe,
text, and Markdown. But this is a
can
case where the tool sort of defaults to wanting everything. And I think there's good reasons for that, but also it has the potential to bite us. How accurate are the AI's recommendations or outputs? Sometimes accurate, I would say. Like my hit rate with Copilot is like I'm I don't know 60% wrong, but it's okay because I know it's wrong. And can the AI tool provide explanation for its recommendations? So this is a thing where it doesn't, at least not that I know of. So it doesn't have like, here's a block of code and I took this from this file. And that can be dangerous if it recommends a big function that's taken verbatim from source code that's protected by a kind of viral license, right? Where the open source licensing says if you use this code, you have to license it under our terms. Um, that's a rare case. And I think generally the way we've used Copilot is we are hyper aware of what it's putting in place, and we're not asking it for entire functions. It's using context to autocomplete for us, but it is a thing to be aware of, and avoid basically taking some big complicated function and plopping it in the source code. Do we need to execute extra steps to validate the recommendations? And again, for Copilot, it's code, so that happens intrinsically. We know whether the code is good or bad, and we have safety checks on that, just like we do for human generated code. Will consumers the output know the output was generated using AI automation? No, because again, it's mutated enough that that context doesn't matter as much. Does it comply with ethical guidelines and legal regulations? So the ethical part for Copilot, for sure, there's debate about it. It's complicated, but I would say the overall industry sentiment on it is it's okay. Is the user interface intuitive and user friendly? Yeah, for Copilot, at least in VS Code, I haven't used it in any other editors. Again, it feels magic. It's like IntelliSense, but like a really smart IntelliSense. Do we need to provide any training before other users are able to utilize it? No, I don't think so. Is it updated and maintained? Yes, GitHub is extremely involved in developing Copilot. Is a private organization or an open source tool? It's not open source, it's Microsoft. Total cost is $10 per month per user.